Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Brothers Creed podcast, where we talk about motivation, experiences, and we explore what the world has to offer. I'm Jared.
I'm Ethan, and today we're going to be talking about the principle of self-reliance. I think this is really important. We're going to talk about what it is, we're going to talk about some of our experiences and others' experiences, and then we're going to talk about how can we all become more self-reliant.
Yeah, it's going to be a great episode. Let's do it.
All right.
You can't climb the ladder of success with your hands in a pocket.
We will not go quietly into the night.
They tell me you're a man with true grit.
I am the one who knocks. Don't ever tell me what I can't do, ever!
That's how winning is done.
Okay, so self-reliance. Today we're going to be talking about self-reliance. The first thing I always do, or I always like to do whenever we are doing one of these episodes about a certain principle in our lives is we kind of follow a pattern, and we want to define it first, and then come up with some stories, some examples, and everything else, and then talk about how we want to become, or how we think we can become more self-reliant in our lives. So for me, first off, I always start off by just plugging in Google like self-reliance and just seeing what comes out. And there was a lot of good definitions out there that I liked. One of the ones that I came across was self-reliance is being able to rely on one's own powers and resources rather than those of others. So just very simple, being able to rely on yourself instead of others, which is pretty simple. I had kind of come up with my own definition of it in comparison to that one, in saying that it is self-reliance is being confident and in control of yourself, even in uncertain times and environments.
Okay, so can you say that one more time?
Yeah, so self-reliance to me was being confident and in control of yourself, even in uncertain times and uncertain environments.
Interesting. Yeah, that's one thing I liked about this self-reliance is that there's so many different aspects to it. And one of the things that surprised me is when I talk about when I initially was thinking about self-reliance, I was thinking, this is going to be about, this will be about keeping a food storage or keeping ammo stock or some kind of other physical preparedness. But really, and in the research that I've done, it's a lot of actually other or mental self-reliance. If you think about being self-reliant, the opposite of that would be being dependent. Or codependent with someone else. And so I also did what you did, and I looked up the definition, which is exactly what basically you said, a reliance on one's own efforts or abilities. I was actually looking into maybe more of a religious sense of what that is, and I found two things that I really liked. One was it said that you use the blessings and abilities God has given you to care for yourself and your family and to find solutions for your own problems. So that was one. And before I share that one, I want to talk about what self-reliance is not. Self-reliance is not doing everything yourself. Self-reliance is not, you have to be financially independent. Self-reliance is not, and by that I mean you don't have to have your own business to be self-reliant. You don't have to have tons of
millions of dollars in the bank.
Yeah. You don't have to have 7 streams of income, although that would be nice. You don't have to have all that to be self-reliant. You don't have to shoulder every hardship you face by yourself. And I think that most of all, it doesn't mean that you can't trust others. So I wanted to. That might be a misconception. People are like, "I'm just gonna do it by myself," and it's very hard to do things by yourself.
I like that, and I completely agree with that. And that was kind of one of the things that I was going through as I, was even looking at some of these stories and things of self-reliance, and it's almost, at the end I kind of felt self-reliance is kind of lonely. And it's just but I don't think it needs to be. I don't think it is. I just because you're self-reliant doesn't mean that you don't enjoy being around others or communicating or trusting others. And so I like that.
That's exactly right. And one of the other kind of religious definitions of this that I felt was really cool was it says, being self-reliant does not mean that we can do or obtain anything we set our mind to. Rather, it is believing that through the grace or enabling power of Jesus Christ in our own efforts, we are able to obtain all the spiritual and temporal necessities of life we require for ourselves and our families. Self-reliance is evidence of our trust or faith in God's power to move mountains in our lives and to give us strength to triumph over trials and afflictions. Dallin H. Oaks said that. So I think that's interesting because it's more of a focus on, being empowered and having that faith in God to be able to do things on your own and to provide for your family, and that with that faith, God will move those mountains.
Yeah, I think self-reliance is a very it needs to be a very well-rounded principle, because at the beginning you said it's not just about food storage or ammo caches or whatever it might be, because you could have 100 years of food storage, but if you don't have any clean water, then it's not going to do you any good. Or you could have 1,000,000 rounds of ammunition, but if you don't have any food storage, it's not going to be good. Or and so it's just like, and those are maybe two just very temporal ideas of preparedness or self-reliance, but it needs to be a very well-rounded principle. If you are completely independent in one area, but you are completely dependent in another area, then I feel like it's kind of a wash.
Yeah, you're very unbalanced in regards to your self-reliance. I think one aspect of this that I think is so important is the emotional aspect of it. There's a very famous, one of the most famous American theologians and poets, or what you could call him, Ralph Waldo Emerson. He wrote actually an essay called Self-Reliance. Mm-hmm. And in this essay, he kind of goes in and talks about, if you ever read it, it's actually kind of funny because I was trying to read through it and it's at a very high grade level. I'm like, wow, this is not very easy to read. It's almost like it's written at like a professor's grade level of reading. It's something very abnormal, which I haven't read at that level. And most of the stuff I read, so it was kind of abnormal. But going through it, he really talks about how it's reliance on yourself. I just want to share two quotes from that he shares. He says, self-reliance, the height and perfection of man, is reliance on God. I thought that was kind of cool, especially in context of the other religious quotes that I had. Another one was, shallow men, this isn't really from that self-reliance essay that he wrote, but I thought this was cool. Shallow men believe in luck or in circumstance. Strong men believe in cause and effect. I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
Because it kind of has to do with self-reliance, and that like you are the one that creates the environment and in your preparedness, as opposed to just getting lucky or, this is just so happened to occur,
Yeah, I like that quote about what was it from Self-Reliance about true self-reliance is dependence on God. Is that what?
Yeah.
Read it again. What was that?
Self-reliance. He just says self-reliance. The height and perfection of man is reliance on God.
I think that having an eternal perspective, and one of the things that I'm going to talk about a little bit is being self-reliant it can give you a sense of peace, like a sense of calm, right? And I think it kind of goes hand in hand with that. If we have an eternal perspective of God and families and afterlife, then obviously we want this life to be as peaceful and comfortable and joyful as possible. But with that idea and understanding of what's to come after, then it almost brings peace to this temporal world.
Well, I agree with that, but what does that have to do with self-reliance?
Well, I was just saying it just because I think to a certain extent self-reliance is a feeling too. I mean,
Okay,
I think
yeah.
it's not only as much as it is physical, or mental. I think it's emotional as well. It's kind of like what does Dave Ramsey say? He always say we didn't have any money. We weren't, and people go, oh, I was super poor. It's like, well, poor is a state of mind.
Yeah.
Right. You were broke. You didn't have any money, and so it's just different. I think the state of mind and willingness to grow and learn more and become more self-reliant is half the battle of just having that mindset and understanding that really all that we have is given from a creator anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. It helped me. It helped me
yeah.
be more confident in myself and saying, okay, I can have more trust.
Well, like that kind of goes back to the definition of the word self-reliant. So does that mean if you're dependent on God, does that make you not self-reliant?
I think that in knowing that God is a perfect being, then I don't know. I mean, that's a good question.
I think that well, maybe the answer is that some people have said prayed like everything depends on God and worked like everything depends on you.
100%.
So in that sense, you're not depending on God, but you're praying and petitioning as if it did, and He will direct your path.
Yeah,
basically.
maybe it's like you understand His role and you understand your role.
Yeah, and you're doing your best. You're doing your best so that He can make up.
Yeah, so that He can make up the difference. He has his eternal role and giving in our life, but it's our role to work and earn. So
yeah, one of the things that we're talking about emotionally is that you get people. I was listening to a podcast just the other day about people who are codependent and how really people who get in that scenario, it could be a spouse or a friendship where one person is just really nervous and they don't want you to go spend any time with each other and they just need your attention all the time. And it's because they're deriving their happiness from somewhere outside of themselves. So and that's part of being self-reliant, is not having to derive your happiness from someone else. If you only derive your happiness from the love your wife shows you, you're going to be mad at your wife when she doesn't show you that love. And then you're going to be super clingy and codependent, oh, I need that love, I need that, because you can't be happy within yourself. You don't have that self-confidence. It kind of goes back to self-confidence is related, but it's just being true to yourself and being okay with that. If you don't have that, then you're not self-reliant. You're dependent on someone else for happiness. And I think that's kind of fits in a little bit to what you were saying about emotional state.
Yeah, for sure. When I was kind of thinking about maybe some personal stories that I've had with self-reliance, there was a ton of stuff that came to mind, and some of it was from childhood, right, and some of it was from just recently. I think that growing up, I think our parents did a really good job of teaching us to be independent, and experiencing things that help us to grow. And whether it was, I don't know, giving us music lessons that strained our mind to be able to say, if you don't practice, you're not going to get better. And that's, you rely 100% on yourself to increase your knowledge or your ability in something. So that was just a quick little example, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say one tiny story that I've always thought was kind of weird is that one time, and was kind of a first manifestation of my own self-reliance or my own abilities. Well, not first, but it was just one that I was kind of shocked. Sometimes when you see someone who is unable to do the things that you can do, you're like, wow. Then you realize, wow, this is actually something that I'm capable of. This is a skill that I have. One time I was out with a buddy. We were driving a go-kart around, and the chain came off of the go-kart. And we were a mile or two from his house. And he's like, oh, man, the chain came off. And I just went back and put the chain back on. And he thought that was the coolest thing ever because he didn't know how to do that. And it wasn't like a big deal. It was just like putting a chain back on a bike. And I had never done that before because it was his go-kart. And I had never even, like, I loved riding go-karts, but we didn't have one at the time. And so, but I was like, why is that so, like, crazy? But to him, it was like, that was awesome. You fixed the go-kart. That was so cool. And I'm like,
we would have had to walk home,
Yeah,
and
I'm
then
like-
my dad would have had to come back and fix it. And then
yeah,
this
I'm
and
like,
that.
dude.
Or call the repairman. You're like, dude, I just fixed it, man.
Yeah.
Don't worry about
So it's like, so that was kind of one example of like, if you have a skill set, you need to have the skills to be self-reliant, whether that's emotionally, being okay with yourself and being able to reiterate your confidence in yourself, or temporarily being able to do things around the house or fix a chain on a go-kart, stuff like that. So that's
one of the first things I wrote down whenever I was doing this, it was with self-reliance, it was the saying, like, a jack of all trades but a master of none.
Yeah.
And it's like sometimes that's considered a bad thing, so you have someone that's good at, or that's decent, that knows a little bit about a lot of things, but maybe that person doesn't know a lot about maybe one specific thing. Now, knowing a lot about one specific thing and nothing about everything else, I mean, you could probably make a lot of money doing that if you master one specific topic.
Yep.
And so I'm not saying that's bad, but I think it is pivotal to have a general understanding of lots of things. Whether it's,
I think so too.
Whether it's, maybe simple mechanics of a car, like how to change a tire. You don't have to know how to, like, mount and balance and all these different type of things, but just to know how to fix a tire when you're on the side of the road, I think that's important. It's something super simple that it's just know a little bit about a lot of things.
I think a lot of these skills are being lost nowadays.
100%.
People aren't teaching their kids, and kids are like, oh my gosh, my tire blew out. I have to wait for AAA, or they're just totally incapable of doing. Even when we were kids, we were, some of these kids are friends and stuff. They didn't know how to do anything.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of unique in the house that we grew up in, that we were kind of, you just do this,
Yeah. And I don't think particularly you can blame someone for not knowing, but
it's a parenting thing.
But I think I think to a certain extent it comes from it's parenting, but then when did it start?
Yeah,
it's kind of like, how far back did it go? Like, well, I had a friend who, was not, I would say, it was just like, if anything's wrong with anything, I'm just going to either throw it away or buy a new one or hire someone to fix it.
Yeah.
And he was like that, and his dad was like that. And I don't know if his grandpa was like that. It's like, I don't know where it started. And so I can't really particularly fault somebody for their upbringing and that. But I think if there's a desire, and what's funny too is that specific friend was like really, really smart. Like really smart. But it was just like some of these simple things that to me just made sense. To him, were like, well, how did you know how to do that? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know. I disagree with. So when people say like, "Oh, this is passed down," I kind of don't like that argument, because that takes away your own agency, and that takes away like your own abilities. So like, Dad never taught us how to really work on, say, motorcycles at all. Like we had one go-kart for a very short amount of time because I wrecked it. I broke the axle off of it after trying to do a ramp. But we didn't really have any kind of motorcycles or dirt bikes or four-wheelers or anything growing up. And I was interested in it. So in my adulthood, I bought probably 6 or 7 dirt bikes, fixed them up, and sold them. And I learned how to do that on my own. And I was in my garage and like oil spilling all over the garage floor, and I'm like trying to figure out like how to take the carburetor off, and then, but I just learned it. And now if there's ever like, I feel like I can fix this, or at least troubleshoot a basics of a small engine fix. And so like, that's something that my dad never taught me, that I learned on my own, and I can pass that on to my kids. So there's always that ability to learn those skills. And that's the great thing about becoming self-reliant, is you can always learn those skills.
Yeah. I like that. So one of the other stories that I had, and this was maybe more this was obviously more recent in this past year, but and it had to do with, and this is more of a temporal experience that I had, right? But it had to do with this whole coronavirus pandemic thing. So right whenever, like the very end of February 2020, when all of this was going on, there was a lot of people were saying, "Oh, it's not a big deal," and then other people were saying this is like the epidemic of our generation, and this is the plague, and then you were supposed to wear masks and not wear masks. I mean, there's so much confusion, but everybody was just freaking out. And I remember it was the weekend before everything was supposed to like shut down, right, and go into lockdown. And it was for the first time, everybody was really scared and nervous, and you know there was all these things, but if you were out of your house and you could get a ticket and all this sort of kind of stuff. And Caitlin and I we were on kind of an overnight up in the mountains, and we were on our phones that night, and it was just like getting blown up and all this different kind of stuff, and there's no toilet paper in the entire world, and all this different kind of stuff. And we were just like, man, should we be freaking out? Are we prepared for something like this? I mean, can we, so whenever we left the hotel the next day, I like took the toilet paper off the roll and like took the extra one that was under the sink and like put it in my bag, and then we left and we got home, and the news, and we're watching, everybody's go to the grocery store and buy some food. All the supply chains are going to shut down, and the shelves are bare everywhere.
They were bare, man.
Yeah,
I went to the meat aisle and everything was absolutely, the only thing left was shrimp.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is that, and we felt because we were on vacation, we were behind the eight ball, and so it was like we came back on a Sunday. And then it was just like we got back later that night, and we were just like, well, we'll go to the store tomorrow. And then I went to the store, and it was pretty much bare. I mean, there was like, normal. There was some stuff that you could eat, right? But it's like not our typical stuff.
Oysters
it was stuff that was maybe a little bit weird that wouldn't really go together. And we were a little bit panicked, right? I mean, we were down to a couple rolls of toilet paper in the house, and we were like, man, we should have prepared a little bit more or whatever. And actually, I was doing some research, and on average in the United States, there is only 3 weeks of food in the typical average home in the United States.
In the average home?
Yeah.
Really?
In the average home.
Yeah.
And that is like,
it seems like less, after like a week, you're like, I'm so hungry. You're just like ravenous, like opening the fridge and closing the fridge.
Yeah. And so, well, the thing is too, and that was like bare survival till everything runs out.
Yeah.
And that was like, actually, you know what? I got my statistic wrong. It's not 3 weeks. It's like 3 days.
Yeah. I was going to say,
no, I got my statistic wrong.
I was going to say that almost seems like the grocery store.
No. It's not 3 weeks. It's 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah. I wrote that down wrong. It is on average, your average household in the United States at any point in time has 3 days worth of food.
And then with the just-in-time shipping for all these grocery stores, I mean, heck, the turnover would be insane.
Yeah, I mean that's 3 days, and I can't even imagine if like the power were to go out or something like that, and you couldn't, if stuff in the refrigerator was going bad and whatever it may be. So, needless to say, we were a little, I wouldn't say panicked, but we were worried.
A little concernicus.
Yeah, seriously. So we ended up, I went to the store and I bought a bunch of stuff that probably didn't need, but I was just spending money. I was just throwing it in the cart because I was like, oh, we need as much as we can. And we had some food in the fridge and some food we had more than 3 days. We would have been fine. Plus we have family in the area who, if we...
I had enough toilet paper. Shannon, my wife, bought ahead of time. And she went to Costco and bought giant, like, this was like 2 weeks before everything. She was like, oh, I think I should go. She had like a premonition. So anyway, we would have shared with you.
Yeah, and so we would have been fine, but still in the back of your mind, it's kind of like, man, I was not prepared for this.
Yeah.
And so one thing that we did when things kind of settled down a little bit is we invested in, and it was an investment, right? But we invested in some food storage for our family. And, it's not like years of food storage or whatever, but it was something to where in the back of my mind, I know that if I wasn't able to get to the grocery store, then, we'd be okay. We're not, my children are not going to go hungry. And so that was something that, we've been able to prepare a little bit, not to say, if the power goes out, do we have enough batteries to power all our flashlights? I mean, that's a whole different thing. That's like the well-rounded self-reliance. But at least in that one area, I felt like I was super deficient, but now I have a little bit more confidence.
Yeah, that's good. And that's the kind of stuff that lasts. You bought the kind of stuff that lasts like 25 years shelf life, and it's like packaged really well, and that stuff's great.
Yeah. So after having that experience, I kind of felt, how does this apply to other areas of my life? And we talked about spiritually. Do I have my own faith, or are my beliefs just because someone who I respect told me to believe something? Not that that's per se a bad thing, especially maybe for children as they're kind of building who they are. But, the next one, physically, am I capable of running, lifting, or carrying something? Can I, we've talked about kind of preparedness before, and not only do I have a bunch of stuff, but do I have the skills to be able to execute in any situation? Yeah. If I'm out in the woods and I break my leg and, I don't have a splint on me, so it's just like, oh, well.
I guess I'll just lay here and die and yell for help.
Yeah, but, so instead of that, having the knowledge or the wherewithal to be able to say, okay, so I can make a splint, or I can do whatever. Yeah. So, and we talked about that earlier, survival, whether it's simple car repair or a skill, just knowing how to do stuff. One other thing that I thought was interesting is socially. I don't think many times we talk about social self-reliance, but I feel that social self-reliance is being able to carry a conversation and not depend on others to smooth out the conversation or to make it so it doesn't feel awkward. I think that's a gift that not everybody has. I've talked to people before, and I don't know, maybe I'm the awkward guy, but I've talked to people before, and it's just like, man, this is an awkward conversation. I'm not enjoying this at all. Yeah. But then you talk to other people, and it's just like, it's like we could sit and talk for hours, and it's just that social self-reliance of being able to, have that confidence. So the last one was financial. We've kind of talked about that, but being financially minded, having knowledge, understanding. We talked about before, life insurance is kind of a way to prepare.
Umbrella insurance. I just purchased umbrella insurance. That's how I know I'm getting old. I had to purchase umbrella insurance, which is an additional liability insurance.
Well, there you go.
So just in case someone sues me for something that I know I needed an umbrella insurance when the neighbor kids who just moved in across the street came over and were jumping on our trampoline, and I look out the window and I see my son pushing one of the neighbors off of the trampoline, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need more liability insurance.
I don't think my homeowner's insurance will cover that.
Yeah, that's only like $2,000 worth of like other liability. So I'm like, I need some more insurance because I don't want my 401k to get raided with some kind of someone's broken arm or something. And then I yelled at my son for doing that, by the way. So I didn't just buy insurance. But yeah, there's so many facets of it, and being, like you said, skill wise, being able to do those things, money wise, like financially wise. I think that it comes back to providing for your family without being dependent. People can be dependent in a lot of different ways. They can be, in some cases, people are dependent on their parents. I've known people who live in really big, nice houses who depend on their parents to pay the mortgages for their house, and I've known people who depend on a trust fund or a wealthy spouse, or maybe they are at the other end of the spectrum and they depend on a check from the government. They depend on their Social Security. I for one am not depending on Social Security because I don't think it's going to be around. Obviously. That's a whole nother conversation, but personally, I don't think there's going to be any money left in that coffer when I get to be older. So I'm not depending on, I'm not even counting that I'm counting that as just a tax right now.
Yeah.
But you know,
you're paying someone else to be dependent.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? It's like, if as you give away your independence, you're becoming a slave, and that's kind of like if someone is paying your way and you're doing all this stuff, you're gonna do what they tell you to do because they're the one that's paying. And so as you become self-reliant, you become free because you are not chained down. If the government is giving you food to your family to feed your family every single month, and then they say, well, you need to do this, you need to do X or Y or Z, then and you don't want to do well, if you can't do those things, then you're not going to get any food, and then you're like, well, then you're tied, you're not free. If they say, well, if you want to be on the government's pay, if you want to be on these checks, then you can't be a gun owner, or you can't be this, or you can't be that, and it's like, whoa, those are, if that were to ever happen, that would be terrible, but you're subject to someone else's
stipulations.
And so it's also like a sense of freedom when you are off on your own, and that control that you have. I think that's ultimately what God wants for us, is to be free.
Yeah.
What's do you have any other stories like?
Yeah. So I had a story that's, and this is just kind of a cool story. To me, it was like the epitome of grit and like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and getting it done, and being reliant only on yourself. So have you ever seen the movie The Revenant?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that movie is loosely based off of a guy named Hugh Glass. So he was a fur trapper, a fur trader, and a hunter in the like mid, let's say 1800s, early 1800s.
I thought it was like 17. I thought it was like earlier than that.
No, it's
pre-revolution.
No, it's the early 1800s.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was part of this party that was led by a man named Andrew Henry, and Glass was one of the hired hunters for this group. They were traveling through the wilderness at that time, which was kind of west of the Mississippi in the United States. There was all kinds of dangers, whether it be animals or Indians or opposing countries that were in that territory as well.
Yeah.
And he was a hired hunter, and he was kind of leading the pack, and so he was walking significantly further ahead of everybody else. And he came across a sow grizzly bear with two of her cubs, and the grizzly bear attacked him and mauled him. So basically, with claws and these bears can weigh upwards of 800, 1,000 pounds, potentially more. And just completely mauled him. I'm sure broke bones and just deep cuts and everything else. So it hurt him so bad to where the point that he couldn't stand, he couldn't walk, he couldn't speak, he couldn't anything. Basically, he could just lay there. So this bear mauled him, and the guys he was with heard him screaming. So they ran up to where he was and they killed this bear. In the movie, he kills the bear himself.
Yeah,
which is cooler, but I think it's just more.
Well, he shoots it with his musket, and then the thing absolutely just destroys him. It's it's a pretty gory scene.
Yeah, and then he takes a knife as it's mauling him, and he's like stabbing it, so didn't really happen. But the thing is that so he gets mauled by this bear, and the leader of the company says he's gonna be dead by the morning. So let's just camp here for the night. He's gonna be dead in the morning. We'll bury him, and then we'll keep moving. Well, the next morning came, and he was still alive.
So they probably didn't make any effort to save him.
Probably not. No.
They're just waiting around for him to die.
And so so he was still alive the next morning, and they said, okay, well, let's build a stretcher and let's take him out of here. So let's just carry him. So they built a stretcher and they were carrying him. So they carried him, and they didn't want to just leave a guy who's like just to die by himself. So they started carrying him. They carried him for 2 days, and he still wasn't dead. And they were so fearful of the Indians in the area and getting captured or killed, and so it was slowing them down so much that this Andrew Henry guy said, "I will pay $80 to any man that will stay behind and stay with Hugh Glass until he dies." And so there was 2 guys that offered to stay behind for the money, and they stayed with him for another 5 days, just basically waiting for him to die. I don't know if they were giving him food or water or whatever. I mean, it said it was the only thing the only way they knew he was alive was they could see him breathing, and then they could see his eyes would move back and forth when he was awake.
Oh, jeez.
And that was the only way they knew he was alive. So after 5 days, one of the guys convinced the other that, we've way overstayed our due here. We've done our duty. They didn't think he was going to live this long anyway, so let's just go. So he convinces him, and they leave. They put him next to a river on the stretcher, and they just peace out.
I thought they buried him like a shallow. That was in the movie. Tom Hardy tries to shoot him or something, buries him in the ground, and just leaves him.
Yeah. So
doesn't he kill his son too? Or?
In the movie, he has a son, and then he kills his son, but that wasn't real life. That wasn't real life. So basically, they let him next to this river, and the Missouri River, and then they just leave. They skip out. And so he's laying there, and he finally kind of gets enough strength. He summons enough strength to kind of overcome his situation, and he starts to crawl towards. I mean, he was a very, very experienced mountain man, and I mean, he knew what he was doing. So he started crawling towards where he knew the closest settlement was. So he started crawling towards the settlement. In order to survive, he ate insects and grass that he would find because he wasn't able to walk. And he was just crawling across the ground.
Was this in the wintertime too?
So it started in, they started in the midsummer of 1823.
Okay.
Is whenever all this happened. And so in the movie, it was like winter the whole time, and he was freezing cold. But so this was happening all through the months from starting in midsummer. So he ended up, he was crawling, and he came across a fresh buffalo kill. Some wolves had killed a buffalo, so he waited for the wolves to leave, and then he actually stayed with that buffalo carcass, and he fed off of it for several weeks until he was able to kind of
and fought off the wolves and
and able to he kind of recouped enough to where he could so that he was surviving, right? He was starting to heal a little bit, and he was able to after that, he was able to move a little bit quicker. So he increased his pace, but he was still crawling, hobbling, limping. I mean, he had broken bones and all these different types of things. So he did come across an Indian tribe that traded a boat, that gave him a boat. And he traveled a little bit of distance on the Missouri River, but he had to get off. So in mid-October of 1823, 3+ months later, he limped into the military fort, that settlement that he was trying to get to. And it was 250 miles from where the two guys had originally left him on the side of the river. Oh, man. And so it was just
Were they there? So
it was the movie basically is he goes and he finds these guys and he kills them and stuff. And it did say that he was driven by his rage and revenge. That kind of drove him to keep going and to survive. But the account really doesn't say what happened. Actually, I did read one account to where he met one of the guys and he forgave him.
That's a much better story
for leaving him out there. Just because, they were scared or whatever else. But
yeah. Wow.
Yeah. It's a crazy story. For me, it was man, that guy's the epitome of, there was nobody else.
Yeah.
He relied on himself and himself alone to save himself.
That reminds me of the story of the 127 hours.
Yeah.
Right? Where the guy
kid that
pins his arm and then he has to cut his arm off to get out of there. I mean, sometimes when the human will to survive and to go on can sometimes be very strong.
Yeah.
That's a cool story. Well, let's talk about maybe some ways that we can be resilient. I've got a kind of a long list here. Maybe we can just do a rapid fire. I'll do one, then you do one.
Cool. Yeah.
So one I had mentioned before is just having that inner confidence in yourself, and that will help you emotionally to be self-reliant and to not seek happiness outside of you, but to know that you are enough and to have that confidence in yourself. That will help you be self-reliant emotionally.
Yeah, I think that's good. One thing that I wrote down was knowledge, and not only knowledge, but practice. You can know how to, and once again, this goes back to survival stuff, but you can read books about how to set snares or whatever, but if you've never actually done it before, then it's a whole different ball game to actually execute what you think you know. And so knowledge, but not only knowledge, but equally as important, I think, practice.
Yeah. Next one I have is having the self-awareness enough to take an inventory of what your dependencies are. So like you said, you were like, oh man, I was unprepared for food-wise. You had the self-awareness to realize that and act upon that and get that food storage for your family in case of a situation. So that is a critical piece, is understand what dependencies you have.
Yeah, I like it. So I have a couple quotes here that really helped me to understand how to be more self-reliant. One of them was, this is kind of like, I think it's kind of maybe a military saying or whatever, but proper preparation prevents poor performance. Something that, kind of goes back to, if you are prepared, you shall not fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
So preparation, I think, is important.
Totally. Like you said, I had learning practical skills, and also having the ability and disposition to learn new things. That is a critical skill too, and being open to and being humble enough to learn new things.
Yeah, I like that. Another thing that I thought was important is teaching your children to the principle of self-reliance. Obviously, a baby is completely dependent, right? I mean, they can't do anything for themselves. But as they grow up, I think giving certain tasks and responsibilities, whether that be like chores or, specific, I remember one time with the boys, I have outside in the garage, I have a thing of Gatorades on top of the freezer. And they know that if I'm out mowing the lawn or something like that I usually will drink a Gatorade, and that if they help me, then they will get a Gatorade. If they do not, then
they don't earn it.
Then they can watch me drink my Gatorade.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was mowing the lawn in the front yard, and then all of a sudden Nixon kind of comes around. I finished mowing the lawn, and Nixon comes around the house, and he's like, "Dad, can I have a Gatorade?" And I was like, well, you didn't really help me mow the lawn, buddy, or you didn't really help me with any of the yard work. So I was like, maybe you can just have a sip of mine. And he was like, no, I did, I helped. And I was like, oh really? And he was like, yeah, I'll show you. And so I walked around the house, and on the back patio, he had picked all of the weeds on the back patio, and all of the grass that kind of grows between the stones and everything. He had picked all of it, and he had done an excellent job.
Nice.
And he was like, yeah, I helped out. I was like, all right,
well done.
Yeah, here's your Gatorade.
Nice. That's cool. That's a really easy and good way to teach kids with that reward, and that's cool.
Yeah. So we had come up with like we do with a lot of these, is we come up with our own personal quotes.
Hopefully these will catch on one day.
Yeah.
So mine is pretty simple, actually. It just says, through the practice of self-reliance, which I think it is a practice, we become more enabled to serve those around us. One cannot give what one does not have.
I like it. That's really similar to mine. I said, an independent man is in a spot to help others overcome their situation and trials. If you are prepared, you will feel calm before the storm. When others panic, you will feel settled and ready. Help where you can to lift up others.
Yeah, I think that's very similar. Yours is a little wordier than mine, but I totally agree. I think that just basically, if you are dependent on someone else, then you don't have the ability to give. Well, maybe that's not true. You have a diminished ability to give by the level of your dependence. So the more independent you are and the more self-reliant that you are, that's the more that you're able to help your neighbor. One just quick story one image that I always think about with self-reliance is, you ever see these videos of I think it was big with Katrina, but some of these big hurricanes that have gone through Texas and stuff, and some of these people, they put sandbags around their entire house, and there's like helicopter footage, and it's looking, and it's just water as far as the eye can see, and then there's one dude's house with like sandbags 4 to 5 feet high around his house, and his house is dry. And like that is the exact example of self-reliance that, he's like, this is not happening to my house. And he built that moat around his house, and he had the ability and the grit to do that, and he saved his house. So I just admire that, and that's something that I just always think about when I think of self-reliance, is that everybody else was like, oh, maybe the FEMA will do it, or the government will pay me, and the guy's like, I'm not losing my house. I'm going to make this happen. And he built the moat around his house, not the moat, but the barrier around his house.
Yeah. That's great. I think this has been a really cool episode. I think it's a topic that could use a lot more than 45 minutes to talk about. But I think it's important that we all kind of evaluate our life. And I think one of the most important things you said, Jared, is being humble enough to recognize I need some help in this area, or I need to improve in this area. And I think that could benefit us all.
Definitely. Well, thank you all for joining us today. This has been a great episode. Again, follow us on Instagram at a.rose.creed. Also, leave a rating for us and some comments as well in the Apple podcast store, iTunes store. That helps us kind of get some more rankings, get some more street cred, so more people will start listening to our podcast. And we're excited to grow the podcast and reach more folks. Ethan and I are loving doing this, and so we'd encourage you to maybe share it with a friend. If you can do that this week, that'd be great. We'd really appreciate that. So,
all right. Well, let's build that creed together.
Let's do it.